what I wanted to do firstly is just outline some very, very basic principles about the divine path as to what's involved on progressing in this way of the soul, or sometimes you might call it the way of the heart. And so what I would like to do is just outline some very basic principles. There's actually only 3 things that you're going to need to do on this path, so a child can understand these things. And that's the beauty of this path, is that because a child can understand them, it means that any single one of God's children can become at one with God, as long as they do the work involved in becoming at one with God, in doing these 3 things. These just 3 things. So let's write down the 3 things first. What do you think they might be?
Experience your emotions.
All right, I'll put that down as number 3. Number 1 and number 2.
Develop a passion for God.
Have a passion for God, and let's call this pray for God's love. Who hates the word pray? Okay, no worries. You're allowed to admit anything here, by the way. I'm going to define the word pray for you in a minute, and you'll see that it's not anything to do with religion generally. All right, second thing. Now, the second thing is really important because, and we'll talk more about it in a lot more detail later, but it's really important because you often hear terminology nowadays of what's my truth or your truth. I have to stay in my truth or your truth. And the truth is that you will not be able to become at one with God unless you learn God's truth. All right? And that is going to be very, very different from your truth. And that's part of the process that you'll be going through, is actually learning the difference between your truth and God's truth. All right? Now that's pretty confronting, isn't it? To actually believe that there's some way that you can actually get to know God's truth. There must be a way. And that way is going to be very, very important for you in your progression. If you refuse to accept God's truth, you will not ever become at one with God. Now, we'll talk more about that in a minute. The third thing. Humility. What's the definition of humility? Any ideas?
To stand under.
To stand under? That's being humbled. Is that what God wants us to do?
To feel for others.
To feel for others? That'd be more like empathy?
Yeah.
To admit we don't know everything?
Yeah, well, obviously we don't know everything. That's pretty easy.
To know the difference?
Can I define it as this? Being willing to feel every emotion that is inside of yourself. And in fact, not just being willing to feel every emotion inside of yourself, but actually wanting to feel every emotion inside of yourself. Can you see why that might be humility? There's a few shakes of the heads.
It can be very vulnerable. You have to be able to overcome vulnerability.
What causes you to be proud, or what causes you to hang on to your ego? Isn't it the fact that you don't want to feel some emotion inside of yourself in the end? So the only way you're going to be able to let go of this thing called ego, or let go of pride, is to actually feel and be willing to feel everything inside of yourself. That make sense? Yeah. So that's the definition of humility I'd like you to take away from yourself. Be willing to face, and not just willing, have a strong desire to face and feel every single emotion inside of yourself. So let's look more at the definitions of these 3 things. What do I mean by pray? What I mean is to develop a desire or longing for God's love to enter into your soul. That's what I mean by pray. So when I say the word pray, it means having a longing in your heart to connect with God and to feel God's love entering you. Now, when I say longing, I'm going to use the word a pure, the word's pure desire. Can you see how that's fairly hard, actually? Isn't it? Like, it's very simple what we need to do on the divine path, but it's not easy. To have a pure desire, it means that every single feeling that I have inside of myself is going to be challenged. So let's say I have a feeling of unworthiness inside of myself. At that instant that I'm feeling that feeling, am I going to be able to receive divine love? No, because I'm not having a pure desire anymore. My feelings are, I'm unworthy of your love, God. So as soon as I have that feeling, obviously my desire is no longer pure for God's love to enter me, and I will need to let myself be humble enough to feel that emotion of unworthiness. Right? Now for me, I've been doing that really solid for the last 6 to 8 weeks now. I've been doing it for probably 5 years, but the last 6 to 8 weeks really solid, trying to focus on feeling those feelings of unworthiness. And it takes you into some really dark places inside of yourself. And if you're unwilling to go there, then of course that unworthiness is going to be blocking that connection with God. You follow me? Yeah. So when I say pray for God's truth, have a pure desire in your heart for truth. Not your own, but God's. But you also, of course, need to have a desire to feel your own. And also to feel the difference between what your truth is and what God's truth is. And that's really hard at times. Because, you know, when somebody comes up and bops you in the nose, what do you want to do? You know, there's a feeling of anger. I didn't deserve that. I want to get them back somehow, right? Now, is that what God does? It's not what God does. So straight away I'm in disharmony with God's truth. Even though it feels so unfair, I feel like I want to bop them back. I know that if I bop them back, I am actually in disharmony with God's truth. Right? And I'm going to need to feel the reasons why inside of myself I feel like bopping them back. Right? And that might take a week to sort through all those feelings, or a month even. Or maybe even a year, it just depends on how long we want to do with it. Definitely a year.